All right, welcome guys. This is going to be episode number 5 of my podcast. My name is Catz, and I am joined by Carole Baskin.
Hey, all you cool cats and kittens.
Nice. So, how are you, Carole?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Love your background, and yeah, I think that's kind of where we should start this, if that's okay with you. I obviously watched background, yeah. I obviously watched Tiger King, and I watched a bunch of your YouTube videos as well. So we'll get to that. But first, I wanted to ask you, how do you become Carole Baskin? Like, where did you grow up, basically, your childhood, and how did you fall in love with big cats and so on?
The very first photograph of me with my parents, there is a cat in the scene, and it turns out to be a little orange and white tabby cat. And I didn't know until a couple of years ago, until I pulled it out of the family album and looked on the back, that cat's name was Tiger. So I think it might have been like written in the stars, like the stars behind you on the wall there, that I would be involved with big cats. I always thought from the time that I was a child that I would be working to protect domestic cats and kittens from being killed in shelters due to overpopulation. But I started doing rehab and release of native bobcats when I was 17. And by the time I was 31, I was at a exotic animal auction buying llamas. And a guy came in with a bobcat on a leash that his wife didn't want anymore. And the guy next to me started bidding on the bobcat. And so I leaned over and I said, when that cat grows up, she is going to tear your face off. And he said, I'm a taxidermist. I'm just going to club her in the head in the parking lot and make a den decoration out of her. And so I started crying, and my husband started bidding, and we probably paid more for that bobcat than anybody's ever paid for a bobcat before, but she was not going to be killed in the parking lot that day. And then that led us a year later to trying to find some animal she could live with, because she was born in a cage, which meant she was not legal to set free. She had been declawed by the former owner, so she didn't have her claws to be able to hunt, even if it were legal. And she was beating up our German Shepherd, beating up my daughter, beating up my husband. And instead of thinking, wow, this is a really wretched animal to share our house with, he started calling around until he found somebody that would sell us a bobcat for her to raise up with. And it turned out to be in Minnesota, which was a really long drive. And we loaded up our van with my daughter. She was 12 at the time, and one of her little friends from school. And we went to Minnesota to get a companion for this bobcat that we named Windsong. When we got there, it turned out to be a fur farm. And what we discovered is they had 56 bobcats and lynx that they were going to kill for their fur the next year. So we came home with all 56.
What?
Yeah. And then the next year, 28. And the next.
How did you even load them? Where did you load them?
Well, these were all kittens the first year. So we went in and we got every pet taxi, every carrier, every bucket we could find, all of the kitten milk replacer we could buy, all of the baby bottles we could find. And they had to be fed every 4 hours around the clock. And then the following year, when that same fur farm contacted us and said they had more kittens, we realized we hadn't solved the problem. And so we said, okay, how much for every adult and every kitten? And that's when we started building cages for all of the adults, and we got all of the cats out of the fur farm. And then there was another fur farm that had 22 cats the following year, and we went in and bought every adult. I don't know if there was any kittens that year at that place, but we bought every cat that they had and brought those home. And then people started calling and saying, would you take my lion? Would you take my tiger? And I'm thinking, what are people doing with lions and tigers in their backyards? So At each step, I thought I could fix this. How hard could this be? I'll just rescue these cats, put them in pet homes. They all started coming back to me. The bigger cats we knew we couldn't put into pet homes. And so by about 1997 or so, I had figured out that the only way we were going to stop this problem was through legislation, so that people couldn't get their hands on these animals in the first place. And that's when we started pressing for federal legislation to ban private ownership.
That's incredible. A very organic story. Like in your childhood, because you had that one picture, and that's awesome. Like I have a friend that's a congressman now in Peru, and the first picture that I've seen of him as a kid was him holding a newspaper with big news, and it's kind of like a similar thing, right? Where it's it just kind of seems destined to some degree. Did you grow up with cats, domestic cats in your house?
Yeah, we always had domestic cats, and it seemed like every time a domestic cat in the neighborhood was injured in some way, it would find its way to our door. So
Mm.
originally, as a child, I thought that I wanted to be a veterinarian. But once
Mm.
I became an adult, I realized that people often will euthanize their pets rather than keep them, just, when there's nothing wrong with them. And I didn't think there was any way I'd be able to deal with that kind of mentality. And so I didn't pursue that as a career.
What was your first cat's name?
That first cat was Tiger.
Oh, the very first one. That was the tiger was yours. Then your parents. That was your pet cat at the
Yeah,
time.
it was
That's
when I
awesome.
was a tiny little baby. They just brought me home from the hospital. They also had a kitten named Tiger.
That's brilliant. Alrighty, and yeah, so it sounds like it was always a passion project of sorts. The beginnings of Big Cat Rescue. So how, like, yeah, how I guess how did you think about it, or did you ever think about how are we gonna make this profitable at all, or make it into a business, or even sustainable, right? So that you can continue to grow and continue doing the same thing. Like when you were buying all of these cats at the start, like, yeah, yeah, what?
I had been very successful in real estate investment. And so it came at a time when I was looking for a way to give back for everything that we had been given. We felt absolutely blessed. And so it wasn't a problem in the beginning to take in all of these cats and to build enclosures for them and support them. But I gather you're not calling from the US. Where are you calling from?
I'm from the U.S. Well, I'm in the U.S. I'm in California. I'm Peruvian originally, though. Yeah.
We had a tiger from Peru.
Oh, really? Awesome.
When you mentioned your friend in Peru, I thought, well, maybe they're in Peru. So
Yeah.
here in the US, with the IRS, if you do something and call it a hobby, they don't let you write it off of your taxes. After a while, they say you've either got to make a business out of this or you can't deduct these expenses. So we decided the only way that we would be able to do that would be to set it up as a nonprofit. But even when we set it up as a nonprofit so that we could deduct the expenses, we didn't really think about having to raise money. So it wasn't until I lost my husband that I actually started having to do things like tours and a gift shop and asking for donations and all of those kinds of things.
That's awesome. You also have your own cryptocurrency now,
Yeah.
Cat. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So Rally.io for anyone that's interested in getting some cat. I own some cat myself, and
Well,
I own
thank
my
you.
own crypto. Hells yeah. So I've also noticed that all of your clothing pretty much has some sort of catty patterns, right? Like, do you have any piece of clothing that doesn't like?
Actually, just recently I had to do some undercover work because we try to expose people who are abusing big cats. And
Mm.
I could only find like maybe 3 outfits in my entire closet that had cat print on them.
That's hilarious. And now going back to the legislation and those beginnings, was it easy to get in contact with people to try and make change, or how did that start? Like, how did you start trying to reach out and to make a difference? Because I know in Tiger King, like one of the first things that Joe Exotic says is, you're very influential. How did you grow that influence?
Weirdly enough, it was through pigs. So when people would visit the sanctuary, we would ask them to fill out a release form that gave us their name, address, and telephone number, and we would build a mailing list so that we could contact them usually about 4 times a year to tell them about things that were going on at the sanctuary and for fundraising purposes. But somebody had asked me to contact our people who cared about animals and ask them if they would support a ban on gestation crates for pigs. They make these little crates that these mother pigs, they can't turn around or anything, and when they have their babies, they're standing in those crates for their entire lives with their babies. And so they were trying to make that illegal in Florida, and we had so much success with that. It was an eye-opener for me that, oh my gosh, we can't educate people enough about why petting cubs is wrong, but we can change the laws. And so I stupidly thought back in the 90s, this will be easy. Look how easy it was with pig crates. No, it's not been so easy. It's been 20 some odd years. But we're getting closer than we've ever gotten before to getting our federal bill passed. We actually had a win in 2003. And in that year, it made it illegal to sell a big cat across state lines as a pet. So there were a lot of parameters there. But in 2003, we had to turn away 312 big cats in addition to the ones that we were able to rescue. And every other year, that number was doubling. And so when that bill passed, it actually dropped the number of cats that we had to rescue for the first time ever. And it dropped it to like 160 something, I think. And then as other states have passed bans and partial bans, that number has continued to decline. So that's what let us know that legislation was the only way we were going to end the abuse.
That's awesome. So yeah, that sounds like a solid win. Is that the biggest win, or is it the only win that you guys have gotten as far as legislation is concerned?
No, actually, we have a whole page at bigcatrescue.org/exotic bills enacted or exotic bans enacted.
Nice.
And on that page, we go through every year and list all of the huge wins for big cats around the world. And some of the biggest ones have been in 2016, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We had been petitioning them since 2011, but in 2016, they finally rescinded. Well, actually, it was back in the 90s we started that, but they had a loophole in their law that made it possible for people to just breed tigers and sell tigers with no oversight. And so we got them to rescind that loophole in 2016. And that was actually what led to the arrest of Joe Schreibvogel. He had gotten away with buying and selling for years. And when that bill became law, nobody was enforcing it. So he just kept doing it, even though he was in violation of the law. And then they made an example of him and saying, yeah, we're going to enforce this law. So that was a huge win. And then there was another big win in 2018 when most of the designers quit using fur. We had been campaigning against fur since we had done those first fur farm rescues. So that was a huge win.
Was that by law as well, that they stopped using fur? Is it illegal to use fur now?
It's not illegal, but what they started doing in HSUS was really key in this, in that they got a fur labeling act passed. And so what that was if you had fur on a garment, you didn't have to say if it was real fur. And in fact, a lot of places would say that it was fake fur because nobody wanted to wear real fur. And so the Truth in Labeling Act made that so they had to say this is a real dead animal. And people were like, I don't want a dead animal. And so that was what led to that bill passing. And then
that's cool.
Actually, there was something else in 2016 that was really huge, but I'm blanking on it now. But there's been so many wins along the way. And I think this one bill that we're working on right now, the Big Cat Public Safety Act, is the biggest one because it bans the cub petting, which is what's driving almost all of the abuse.
That's incredible. And if your goals are accomplished, you'll put yourself out of business eventually. That's your ultimate goal, right?
That is my ultimate goal. There shouldn't have to be places like Big Cat Rescue that rescue animals from horrible places. There just shouldn't be horrible places for these animals. We should be treating animals better than this.
How has COVID impacted Big Cat Rescue, and as far as like the efforts, and as far as also like the amount of cats that you are intaking?
When COVID-19 hit on March the 15th, we closed our gates, and we had about 27,000 visitors per year before that. And that was about $1 million. It was a little bit over $1 million a year of our budget. We have to raise somewhere between $3.5 and $4 million a year to take care of our cats. And that was like a third of it. And so we haven't had that revenue, and we still don't have that revenue because we're still closed. Even though most of our people are vaccinated now, there's no vaccine for the cats. And we can't expose the cats to COVID because they can catch it and die from it. So we have not been able to open back up to tours.
And the solution to this, though, you did do a virtual tour of sorts that's available now, or is that in the works still?
We do virtual tours every day, walking around on Facebook with we'll go live on Facebook and on YouTube so that people can still see the cats and enjoy the cats, and our keepers answer all their questions about them. We also, in June of last year, actually launched the Big Cat Rescue VR game, and it was available for the Oculus Rift. And just in June of this year, finally got it released for the Oculus Quest. And it's also available on Steam for any kind of a headset. And then that same game is offered in video arcades all across the United States. And it was a few months ago, we worked with Victory XR, and they're the people who supply these kinds of games to schools or to homeschoolers. And what the purpose of the game is to teach people about tigers in the wild and what we need to do to protect them, and to create a much more engaging environment. I mean, when you put that headset on, you're in the forest with the tiger, and you've got to find the tiger and rescue her and set her free.
What if it eats you? What if it jumps you? It doesn't attack you like on the.
You got to be ready to run.
That's nice.
But I'm thinking that this is the future for zoos. We shouldn't have these animals in cages. We could have these location-based experiences where you go in and you put the headset on and you've got the cold air blowing on you and you're in the Himalayas and you're seeing these cats through internet streaming remote-controlled cameras that are live. And so you could like see on a heat map, I need to hop over to camera number 36 because that's where the action is. That's the future.
Oh, that sounds amazing. So you would be cruising live through these forests and you would be interacting with actual cats in that space.
Right.
Oh wow, that sounds really cool. I thought it would be like a pre-programmed experience of sorts, and that didn't sound nearly as cool as what you're describing.
Well, our current game is pre-programmed, but what I expect is that we can do this other thing where it's live. And that was part of launching the Cat Coin. I'm not doing that as an investment. I'm trying to lure in people who care about cats and who are technologically savvy, who can help us build this out.
Well, that's awesome. That's perfect. Now, I do have to ask, what is it about cats that you love or identify with? What is it about, cats, about their essence, like about their personality or,
You know, I often wonder, how is this my calling? You know, couldn't I have been like involved in climate change or something? Why cats? That seems like such a stupid calling. Cats are your calling. But
someone has to do it.
Well, I think that's it. And I believe that we're eternal, and that when we're on the other side of the veil, we're like, oh my gosh, I just came back from Earth. I forgot who I was. I have this huge mission that I was working on to try and save these exotic cats from being killed in the wild or ending up in horrible cages. And so I'm going to hop back down onto planet Earth, and we're going to all work together. And this time you be the bad guy, I'll be the good guy. And we'll try to go through this and get enough people caring about this that they save the planet. And I think we're just playing this eternal game with each other, and that we are constantly changing roles and forms and working together toward more enlightenment. So that's how I've been able to deal with some of the really horrible things that have happened, is in the belief that everything is working together for the good.
I'm with that. I can get behind that fully, but still the question remains, you as Carole Baskin, like when you come into this world, and obviously you've always had the connection with cats, but what is it about the cat personality, or what is it about the big cats that has you gravitating towards them? I know it's ultimately a story, and that ultimately someone has to do it, and everyone's doing their part in some way, shape, or form. My name is Catz, but I love dogs, for example, and there's a lot of things that I can relate to dogs on. So yeah, just wondering what it is about cats for you.
At home, I have 2 pet cats, and both of my cats are feral cats. And if I look back at most of the cats that I've had in my life, they were feral cats. And I think the reason that I am so drawn to cats in general is because I'm kind of feral on my own. Cool. I don't like being touched. I don't want people crowding me. I like my own space. I'm kind of aloof. I'm independent. And those are things that cats, especially feral cats, are. I never anticipated getting involved with, it was never like I was a child that thought, oh my gosh, I want to work with tigers. No, I never had that thought in my life. It wasn't until they were dumped in my lap that I was just like, tigers, really?
Yeah, and that's kind of the answer that I was looking for, because I love dogs, for example, but I'm also an extrovert. I really like people and like there's a good in that, and some people will take a virtuous stance for one side or the other, but really, to me, like you said earlier, we're all doing our part, and yeah, that's awesome that Carole Baskin is, kind of feral and individualistic to some degree, perhaps, like the cats, right? And I think that's cool. I mean, cats are awesome. I sometimes wish I was a little bit more like that, and yeah, I might just have to get a cat at some point, because my dog is just like, she was just overwhelming for me, It's like, oh my God, now we're both just gonna be sad and we're both gonna want to cuddle, but then she wants to cuddle all the time, and it's like, oh my God, like, you're like, oh no way.
Out of my space. I need like a 3-foot space around me.
All right. And that makes you kind of the perfect person to understand cats in the way that you can give them that space in the cages, I suppose, in the way that you have built them. And there's a lot of information on your YouTube channel about this, and how large those enclosures really are. And about how you feel like the portrayal of what Tiger King did was pretty unfair on many of those fronts, right? Because the opening scene, and impressions are very important, obviously. The opening scene where they introduce Carole Baskin is you in front of a very small enclosure where I imagine the lion was probably drinking something and then would go out to run, right? But it looks like the lion is in a tiny cage, and that's kind of like the first impression that you get of you through the show.
And throughout the show, it's like every time they have me in front of a cage, it's in front of one of those feeding boxes. I didn't realize it until I went back and watched it over and over again. And I was like, geez, no wonder people think we have small cages. This is all they showed, was the feeding lockout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but really, I mean, once they're done feeding there, they have a very large space to run, and to kind of exercise, and to have enough space to be on their own, so that they can be themselves, right? So that they can have their own space. And yeah, again, a lot of that on your YouTube channel, so anyone watching should check that out. And so what else was it about Tiger King that bothered you, perhaps?
Well, the entire notion that sanctuaries and zoos are the same, it was a horrible thing to do to all of the legitimate sanctuaries. Zoos are in the business of buying and breeding and selling, and in some cases allowing people to touch the animals. There's not too many that do that, but there's a few. And sanctuaries, a legitimate sanctuary, does not buy or breed or sell or allow public contact. So it's like we're at total opposite ends of the spectrum as far as what our philosophy is. And yet the thing we do have in common is that there are cats in cages at both places. And the public only came away from Tiger King in thinking that that was what made us all the same and all equally as horrible as these roadside zoos. It was a shame they did that.
I see. And so, but you did have tours and did like part of your income, which is ultimately going back to the cats, and to rescuing more of them, right? Like, but part of that was people visiting, like a zoo kind of thing, right? Or there's no fundamental difference in that area, right?
Actually, there is. So as people are allowed to wander around and harass the animals and throw things at the cats and throw things in the cages. That doesn't happen at a sanctuary. At a sanctuary, it's a guided tour. So you have somebody with you who is educating you the whole time about why these animals don't belong in cages and why you shouldn't go to zoos, why you shouldn't pay to pet cubs, and why you shouldn't pay to go see a baby animal on display. And by contrast, zoos are doing exactly the opposite of that. Now, the one scene that they used that showed our tours was a 1-day-a-year event that we do called the Wildcat Walkabout. And on Walkabout, we have like 600 people who come here for 3 hours. I have 70 of my own staff come and position them everywhere around the property so that people can't bother the cats. They can't throw anything or yell or scream or run or do all the stuff that kids do at zoos. And it's a very controlled environment for that 3 hours. But it's only once a year. They made it look like that's what we do all the time.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting. Because, yeah, that sounds like a guided tour is much more respectful of the cat's environment. And you're not going to have people, even not just throwing things, but a lot of the time at zoos, people are trying to get a reaction out of the animal, right? and so you lock eyes with the animal. That's an interaction, and the animal is going to react to that, and ultimately you're affecting how they behave and perceive their environment. So it sounds like with guided tours and things kind of moving along, and people not actively looking to interact so much as to just observe the animals.
But
there is a little bit of
from the very beginning, not to call the cats or make noise to attract the cats. They were only 20 people on a guided tour, and we would have a tour guide and a person we called a backup to make sure everybody stayed close together, which is why you can't do it in COVID. You can't keep 20 people close together. But we also, our tour system was something where you wore an earbud. And so as the guide would walk up to the cat, they would press the cat's story on an iPad and it would play in your ears. So it was a very quiet thing as people wandered through the sanctuary. It wasn't like a tour guide yelling information or anything.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, that clears a lot of things for me. But I can see how it's easy to portray a sanctuary as being similar to a zoo. From the perspective of its, part of its income is people visiting, and there's still, cats in cages and stuff like that. But obviously there's fundamental differences. And underlying that, as you mentioned, is the fact that one is acquiring the cats and breeding the cats for the purpose of profiting from the cats, whereas the other one is acquiring cats who are being mistreated. So you would be, you would say like perhaps like Joe Exotic and what he was doing and keeping so many cats in more enclosed spaces and such, that is from your perspective abuse, whereas what you're doing is giving the cats their freedom and their individuality and their needs from situations where you're not taking them or stripping them away from the jungle or breeding them, but rather rescuing them from worse situations that they're already in.
And it's important to point out, part of our policy, and not all sanctuaries do this, but we do, if we rescue a cat from somebody, we have them sign a contract that they can never own another exotic cat. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these places will take their cast-offs each year and just enable them to buy and breed more. And that's not fixing the problem. So when we have them contract with us to never own another exotic cat, it actually says that if I even see a picture of you posing with a cat anywhere on the internet, you owe me whatever it takes to take care of this cat for the rest of the cat's life. For a tiger, that's $10,000 per year per cat just for food and vet care. So if I take in a 10-year-old tiger and it could live another 10 years, that's a $100,000 commitment that they would have to pay me for if I caught them breaking the contract, and nobody has yet. We have some tigers here. We have one that's 25. So sometimes they live a really long time.
That's incredible. And I would ask, I guess, given all your policies and whatnot, have you ever been close to one of those big cats? And given your personality as well, right? Because it seems like you're both, the cat and yourself are catty type people. And so, like, have you ever developed a strong relationship with any given cat?
I did in the early years because we were handling the cats. We were bottle feeding them. It rescued all those kittens from the fur farm. And so I had a personal relationship with them. And we started doing something with our visitors in probably about 96 or 97, where they would tell, we take them around for an hour and a half, telling them all the reasons why an exotic cat is a bad pet. And at the end of it, they clearly did not believe me, and they still wanted to go buy an exotic cat. And so I started saying, how about you spend the night with one of these cats in one of our cabins here? And all the cat wants to do the entire time it's with you is pee on you, because aren't things that are theirs. And when people experience that, then they do not want one of those as a pet. And so we did that for years. People could spend the night in the cabins, cats would pee on them, and they'd be like, I'm so glad I did this. I do not want one as a pet. But what happened when the social media came around is people would come and spend the night with, and this was not with lions and tigers, this was with smaller cats like bobcats and lynx, but they'd spend the night with the cat and they'd take all these pictures and then they'd post those on social media. The people who were on social media didn't get that peeing experience. And so for them, they're looking at that and thinking, that's cool. I want to do that. And so by 2003, we figured out we had to stop that because we were sending the wrong message.
I see.
And if we're not going to let the public do it, we're not going to do it ourselves either. So by about 2004, I think we had stopped touching the cats here altogether, even those that we had any kind of a relationship. And the cats don't miss it. One of the things that, yeah, they do not. But one of the things that people will do is they'll try to create this image of them having some relationship with the cat. So they'll be putting their hands against the fence so that the cat rubs up against them, or they'll reach in and scratch the cat as the cat goes by. What the public doesn't know is that cat's not seeking attention. What that cat is doing is rubbing their scent glands, and they're saying, this is the border of my territory, and you keep your stuff on that side, and I'll keep my stuff on this side. And so that's what people are seeing, but they don't understand it. So they think that when they see somebody touching a cat, it's affectionate or that it's a bond.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, you've explained so much about cat behavior, and yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? So that's really cool.
And Tiger King. Sometimes cats be like, even though I put my scent here, if I can reach out and get something off of your side, I'm going to do that. So we don't want to pull that close to the fence.
Right. Yeah. So as far as the rest of Tiger King, then is there anything else that you took issue with that you wanted to touch on, or?
Well, the whole thing. I mean, there was virtually nothing in Tiger King that I felt portrayed accurately what was happening in this world. For one, it said that Joe and I were having this feud. I've never even spoken to him. I've seen him in person 5 times. 4 times was in courthouses, and the 5th time was at a legislative event where they were asking for public input on a state bill. And he had attacked this other little lady, and I just got in between the two of them. I didn't say anything to him then. And yet the whole premise of Tiger King was that there was this feud. And then, of course, all of the stuff about my husband and talking about me treating his children poorly, all of that was a lie. My husband was suffering from dementia. He could never read or write above about a 1st grade level. I was the person who had earned the money and built up our wealth. And when I married him, I actually took everything that he had and I put it in a trust for his kids. He didn't care enough about his kids to do that, but I did it. And then later on, when his kids turned against him and tried to get more money out of him, I think it was like 4 or 5 years after he divorced their mom, she came back and wanted more money. And so he told me to take them all out of the will and to dissolve their trust. And I ignored him because I felt like these are his kids and they should get what's coming to them. And so I just refused to do it. And so when he did disappear, I offered to give them their trust and half of everything else. And they just kept pressing that they wanted more and more. And so I was, in fact, after Tiger King, my attorney came to me and he said, I cannot believe the way that they were talking about you because you were so kind to them and so gracious. And anybody who had, read the court filings, and I had given all of this stuff to the producers of Tiger King, they could have produced the evidence showing that those were all lies, but they just chose not to.
Are you taking any repercussions to right these wrongs from Netflix, essentially?
I don't know. I have 4 years to make up my mind if I'm going to do that. But for me, the most important thing is to get this federal bill passed that bans the cub petting. And the reason is that the cub petting is producing hundreds of cubs every year that are being used for about 16 weeks. As you saw in did you watch Tiger King?
Mm-hmm.
So as you saw in Tiger King, when the mother is delivering the babies, they are right there pulling those babies out as soon as they hit the ground, and they start pimping them out as soon as they can. By the time they're about 16 weeks, they can take the finger off of a child. So now they're a liability. At that point, they'll give them away. They'll sell them. Sometimes they'll keep some of them for breeding more cats the following years. And what's happening is when you have hundreds of these cats entering the legal trade for pets, then it puts increased pressure on wild populations because all of that smokescreen of legal trade is hiding the illegal trade of poaching these cats for their teeth and their skins and their bones. If you get caught with a tiger tooth necklace, like everybody in Joe's family said he used to give them tiger teeth for presents. So I mean, here you talk about using this poor cub all the way up until you can't use it anymore, and then killing it for its parts and giving those parts away to your family members. What kind of person does that? But if you get caught with those items, you can just say it's your pet tiger. Whereas if you had a ban on people having pet tigers, then it would be as bad as if you had poached that tiger straight from the wild, which is 5 years in jail and a $20,000 fine. So that's why we need to stop the cub petting, which is creating all of those cubs, and then eventually phase out private ownership. Our bill doesn't take away anybody's pet tiger, but they can't buy or breed more. And so that problem will die out.
And that's very interesting. And for more of your explanations and your discrepancies with the documentary itself, on your YouTube, you have a mini series of like 10 or so videos where you go over all of the discrepancies, right?
Yeah. The best place to go is bigcatrescue.org/Netflix. And right there, I go through minute by minute every single episode of Tiger King. Wow. And I say, when you saw this on the screen and these people were saying this, here's the actual evidence you can see, like the court documents, or my husband had been diagnosed as being bipolar. And so everybody was trying to say he was in perfect mental health. It was like, no, he wasn't. I was taking him to all kinds of doctors because he was in such bad shape. And so all of that evidence is there for anybody who cares to look at it. And those videos that you mentioned are there as well.
Yeah. And I have to ask, did you at some point resent your husband? Because it seems like you're almost not allowed to, because the documentary portrays you as a murderer, essentially, right? And so as harsh as that is, when you do talk about your husband, it seems as though there's some animosity that you're not able to, or maybe not feel able to express because of how you have been portrayed, if that makes sense. For instance, in the video where you explain about your ex-husband wanting to move back with your daughter at some point, and you said you weren't going to let him have access to her, right? And like stuff like that, like sounds like, like you didn't fully trust him, at least, or something like that.
Well, his previous wife had said that the reason that she had divorced him, back when she divorced him, she said the reason was because he and her 14 or 15-year-old niece had had sex, and it was statutory rape. I didn't believe that at the time, but as I saw him becoming more and more mentally unstable, I didn't know what he was capable of. And by him wanting so desperately to have my daughter in the same house with us, it really freaked me out. And so I didn't want to take a chance that he would do something in his demented state that in a better state of mind he would not have. And as far as like resentment, I mean, I felt like there was an awful lot of burden at the time because I was taking care of 200 cats. I was running a multi-million-dollar real estate business. And I was trying to take care of a husband that I thought had Alzheimer's. We never got that diagnosis because he disappeared before I could get into that doctor's appointment. That was later in August of that year. And so he was already gone by then, but I'm pretty sure from the way he was acting that that's what it was. And so there was a lot of stress going on, of course, but I didn't hold it against him. I loved him from the time that I was a teenager. And I wanted to take care of him. It just was really hard taking care of everybody.
Yeah, it's taxing. It's got to be taxing. For sure. Now, after Tiger King, the aftermath, I suppose, you did get a bunch of hate, I'm sure, which I was surprised that you were relatively easy to reach. So how do you deal with the hate, I guess, would be my first inquiry into this.
I have about 3 hours of people threatening to kill me and saying how much they hate me and calling me every name under the sun. And after a while, it was like, how many more hours of this should I record? Because it could have gone on for probably days. I don't take it personally because I really do believe, like we were saying earlier, I believe that we are eternal and that we're all working together toward more enlightenment for everyone. And so I just don't.
It just bounces right off. Thick skin type thing. Fair enough.
But you can imagine if somebody were saying those things about you, you could say, yeah, they don't know me. But if they were saying those things about your mother or somebody you loved, that's where it really hurts. And so for my husband and for my daughter, I think this was extremely hard for them.
So that is where most of your regret comes from, is how it would have affected them. That's fair, and that's awesome. I suppose I could see that because it is part of that catty personality too, right? You're just more resilient, and people will see that and they'll think,
you don't like them.
yeah. I mean, that's good. And so I also see that there's a lot of references to the documentary on the website of Big Cat Rescue. So do you find that in spite of all the bad publicity and the smearing of your name, at the end, does it help or is it hindering? Like, for example, with the legal efforts that are the main thing that you seem to care about, for instance, right? Advancing that legislation so that we can actually do better for big cats. Is it a hindrance or is it an aid, the documentary overall?
We weren't sure because we knew that our existing donors would stay with us. They would know that these things were lies about our cages and how we treat the cats and the smears on my name because they know me. But we weren't sure whether we would ever be able to attract new donors because the only reference that they might have of us is Tiger King. But as it turned out, we just got through looking over the books for the first quarter of this year. And last year, we ended up about the same as the year before. So that was good. And this year, we're still running on par for about the same as both of the previous years. So it wasn't an increase or a decrease that we've witnessed because of Tiger King. As far as the bill goes, I'm not really sure. I think, we really thought we were going to get this bill passed in 2020. We had everything lined up to do it. We had the co-sponsors, we had momentum, and then COVID hit, and then Tiger King hit, and then there was the election that just had everybody all up in arms. And Congress wasn't coming to work because of COVID. And so it was like we couldn't get a hearing because there was nobody there. And finally, in December, they called it to the floor for a House vote, and we actually won with a 2/3 majority bipartisan vote. So we were really excited. All it had to do was go before the Senate, and there's so many bills before Congress at any given time. The Senate just never got around to it, and then the session expired the end of the year. So we had to start all over again in January of this year. But we've got 179 co-sponsors in the House and 23 in the Senate, which is better than we've ever done so far in a year. So I'm really thinking we can get it done this year. And whether or not that has anything to do with Tiger King, I can't really say because we were so close to doing it without Tiger King before.
Yeah. And like you said, I mean, it's been a lot of things going on, right? Like COVID has tended, for example, to make people a little bit more conscious in general and tend to things that they perhaps wouldn't have otherwise, right? Like to really sit down and think on how we are doing things and on the environment oftentimes, and by extension things like big cats. So yeah, it would be very difficult with the elections, with COVID, and with Tiger King all being in the same area to know what is affecting what. So that is a very good answer. And to be honest, I think this whole interview, you've had great answers, and I am so glad that we did this. So thank you. And it's been lovely. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about before we head out?
I think the way that we save this planet is through what we were talking about earlier. As zoos abandon the idea of keeping wild animals in cages and adopt these virtual reality, live interactive type interactions, then imagine if all of the ad revenue and the subscription fees for those live feeds were plowed back into the local economies where these animals live. That's going to make everybody in that area a game warden who wants to protect those big cats. You can't have big cats surviving in an area unless the entire ecosystem is working properly. There has to be plenty of prey animals, which means there have to be forests and there has to be clean water. And if all of that money is coming into those areas where these animals live, those people can have a higher level of a higher standard of living than they could ever have by cutting down the forest in order to burn the trees to have enough warmth so they don't freeze to death, you know? So I think this is how we protect our entire planet, is by having the entire place hooked up to the internet and streaming to those of us in cities and towns where we don't have these magnificent animals the opportunity to enjoy them living free the way they should be.
That's awesome. I gotta get a patent on that game going, Carole, before someone else jumps on the idea, because I'm sold on it.
I want everybody to jump on it. I don't want the money out of it. I just want it to get done so that we can save this planet and these beautiful animals.
Wonderful. Well, that is a great message, I think, to end this on. Really appreciate your time. Again, if you guys would like to check out Big Cat Rescue's website, Carole's YouTube, and also her cat coin, her crypto on rally.io. So thank you very much, Carole, and I hope to talk to you again, quite honestly.
My pleasure.
Have a great day.